I was in a severe car accident and fell into a deep coma, only to find myself transported into the world of an ancient novel. I became a little cook at Chunyu restaurant and, unexpectedly, ended up adopting the story's notorious villainess, Xia Yitang. The system warned me that she would one day steal the heroine's fortune, even go so far as to commit matricide and rip out hearts. It insisted I couldn't keep her, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon her. When I first met Xia Yitang, she was just a skinny, malnourished little girl. Her eyes sparkled with hunger as she stared at the bowl of plain noodles I had made, but she still coldly warned me, "If there's poison in this, the authorities won't let you off." The system scoffed, saying she was born with a twisted personality and would eventually kill me. Ignoring it, I handed her the bowl and watched as she slurped the noodles clean despite her feigned disdain. The madam of Chunyu restaurant eyed me up and down with ridicule at first, mocking me for trying to aim too high. But after tasting my crispy pork belly, she immediately made me the restaurant's cook. Picking up the wary little girl, I rushed to the kitchen. The system sighed repeatedly in my mind, saying, "You have no idea what kind of disaster you're holding onto. She'll be your undoing someday." Little Xia Yitang was truly a handful. She glared at me daily, shooting metaphorical daggers at me with her eyes, and once even stabbed my arm with a silver hairpin. But having grown up in an orphanage, I was used to kids with rough edges. How could I abandon a child that fate had placed in my care? Whenever she threw a tantrum, I would hand her a small bag of homemade candied plums to pacify her. True to form, she would suspiciously sniff the plums before quietly taking a bite. With some coaxing, I got Yitang to wear boys' clothes and help clean tables. Though she was initially reluctant, her cute appearance soon charmed the restaurant's staff, who would often give her candies and coins. After a long day, her little face would be sweaty, her small hands clutching a few candies. When I tried to pick her up to wipe her face, she stiffened and struggled, shouting, "What are you doing? If you hit me, I'll tell the big sisters. They like me better anyway." My heart ached for her then, and I softly reassured her, "I'm just cleaning your face. It's important to stay clean before eating." At dinner, I made braised pork trotters and chicken mushroom porridge. Yitang devoured the food but froze when she noticed the scratch on my arm. The next day, she silently placed a bottle of medicine on the table in front of me before running off to work. Though she didn't say a word, her gesture spoke volumes. I sighed, stroking her head as I thought, "What a stubborn little child." As the days passed, Yitang began to adapt to life at the restaurant. Her once gaunt cheeks grew fuller, and she even started helping me in the kitchen. I prepared 3 meals a day with love and care, gradually nourishing her from a frail sapling into a healthy little girl. The system continued its sarcastic remarks, "You're wasting your time. She's destined to kill you one day." But I paid it no mind. Yitang gradually became more reliant on me. Though she sometimes made sour faces, she began helping out willingly, even fetching tools while I cooked. The system insisted she was inherently rebellious, but I saw her as a child who simply needed love. Having grown up in an orphanage myself, I knew all too well the pain of abandonment. How could I bear to let her go? Now, though she still grumbles, saying, "When you're old, don't expect me to take care of you," every night, she sneaks candies she's earned onto my pillow. Holding the small treats in my hand, I can't help but smile to myself and think, "Villainous? Maybe not anymore." Sweet and sour ribs, sweet and sour pork, crispy roast duck. No matter what I cooked, Yitang always devoured it, her eyes sparkling with excitement. During the day, she helped sweep the floors in the restaurant, becoming more efficient with each passing day. Occasionally, she even assisted in the kitchen. However, she never called me mother. She would swagger in for meals and say nothing to me. The madam of the restaurant couldn't help but ask, "Are you two having some kind of fight?" I simply smiled and said nothing. Yitang was a sensitive child. Expecting her to adapt quickly to changes was unreasonable. One day, while I was perfecting a new dish in the kitchen, the rich aroma of fried chicken and dry chili peppers filled the air. As I plated the dish, a commotion broke out in the front hall. A drunkard, refusing to leave, spotted me bringing out the food and leered. "Hey, little chef, not bad looking. Why don't you have a drink with me?" I held back the retort on my tongue, reminding myself that this was a customer and that Yitang's well-being depended on my job. But then, the man reached for my waist. Before I could react, a small figure darted forward. Yitang grabbed a plate and smashed it over the man's head. "Who gave you the right to touch my mother? I'll chop off your filthy hands," she yelled. Startled by the blow, the drunkard sobered up slightly but angrily raised his hand to strike her. I quickly grabbed a kitchen knife and stepped in front of Yitang. "Try it, you'll regret it," I warned. Unfazed, the man lunged at me, but the commotion was interrupted by a commanding voice at the entrance. "Which one of you is Xia Anya and Xia Yitang?" The Marquis people had arrived. Yitang instinctively clutched the hem of my sleeve, her eyes wide with unease. The system in my head mocked me. "See? I told you. The plot was bound to catch up with you." A lavish sedan chair waited in the alley. Out stepped the Marquis' wife, Shenjing, her elegant dress and striking features radiating authority. Her sharp gaze flickered between me and Yitang before settling on me. "You must be Madame Xiat. Years ago, we gave birth at the same time. The midwife told me my daughter had a birthmark on her shoulder, but it was gone later. Could it be the children were switched?" Her cold tone made Yitang's hand grow clammy in mine. I squeezed it gently and replied evenly, "All I know is that Yitang is my daughter." "What does the lady think?" Shenjing sneered. "Your daughter? Or the one you deliberately switched, separating me from my child for years?" Her voice grew sharper. "Today, I'm taking her with me." Yitang lowered her head and let go of my hand. She walked to Shenjing and said quietly, "I have a birthmark. The Marchioness is my real mother." I stared at her retreating figure, swallowing back the words, "Come back for walnut pastries." Shenjing cast me a frosty glance. "What? Still denying it?" I met her gaze and said, "Yitang is frail and accustomed to my cooking. I'll go with you to take care of her." Surprised, Shenjing hesitated before reluctantly agreeing. Of course, a mere cook couldn't ride in the sedan chair. I trailed behind it, the system in my head sighing repeatedly. "Is it worth it? She's a villain by nature. She'll only harm you in the end." Clenching my fists, I answered silently, "She's my daughter. Of course, it's worth it." At the Marquis' residence, a refined young lady stood gracefully by the entrance. Her delicate features and soft demeanor exuded nobility. This was Qin Liang, my biological daughter. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she had been crying, and the Marquis hovered protectively beside her. Yitang alighted from the sedan chair and sneered. "Sister? How could I have such a sister? The lady just said she only has one daughter. So who are you?" Her sharp words stung, and Shenjing snapped, "No manners at all. From now on, learn proper etiquette from Liang." Yitang's lips tightened, her eyes growing misty. I stepped forward and picked her up. Yitang was taught by me. How could she lack manners? If a girl isn't a little feisty, she'll be bullied outside. Yitang stiffened in my arms but soon buried her face in my shoulder, tears dampening my clothes. At dinner, the food didn't suit her. The sweet and sour dishes were too cloying, the rice too hard. She barely ate a few bites before putting down her chopsticks. I carried her out, and Shenjing assigned us a courtyard at the far west end of the estate, while Liang's courtyard remained near hers in the east. That night, Yitang lay in bed, watching me with wary eyes. I sat beside her, gently patting her arm to lull her to sleep. After a while, she whispered, "Mother, about earlier, that's not what I meant." I smiled softly. I know, Yi Tang. I raised you. I understand. She nestled closer, mumbling, "It's still your scent that feels safe." A faint smile tugged at my lips as she drifted off to sleep, her small hand clutching mine. That first night in the Marquis's residence, I sighed quietly. Yi Tang was still so fragile, needing love to heal her scars. Whatever the system said, I couldn't abandon her. She was my daughter, no matter what. Rules were strict in the Marquis's residence. Early the next morning, Yi Tang was required to pay respects to Shen Jing. When I arrived, Qin Liang was already there, her eyes shadowed with dark circles. It seemed she hadn't slept well either. I sighed inwardly, dealing with the truth of their identities must be overwhelming, especially for two young girls. During the meeting, Yi Tang suddenly sneered, "Why does she get all the good things? Am I your daughter, or is she?" Her sharp tone directly targeted Liang. My heart sank. Yi Tang's stubborn nature wouldn't back down easily. As expected, Shen Jing's face darkened. "How dare you speak like this? You're grounded in your courtyard for the next few days." Sensing the tension, I quickly entered with a tray of food and broke the silence. No matter how big the issue is, nothing comes before eating. "Let's eat first." Yi Tang hesitated but finally sat down, burying her face in the bowl of 3 delicacy soup. Liang, meanwhile, quietly sipped the calming soup I'd prepared, finishing bowl after bowl. After the meal, Shen Jing's mood softened. "The Empress Dowager's birthday banquet is approaching," she said. "You, as my daughters, will attend together. Liang, help Yi Tang learn proper etiquette." Her words left me uneasy. The system's voice echoed in my mind, "This banquet is where the drama unfolds. Yi Tang falls for the third prince at first sight, but the Empress Dowager grants Liang the marriage. Out of jealousy, Yi Tang reveals Liang's true parentage, ruining her reputation. This leads to tragedy for Yi Tang, who eventually meets a cruel end." I couldn't help but suspect that the story might not be as straightforward as it seemed. The next day, Liang hesitated outside Yi Tang's courtyard before entering. When Yi Tang saw her, she scoffed and turned back inside. Moments later, she returned with a few red plums, tossing one to me and one to Liang. "If you're here to teach me, hurry up and get started." Surprised, Liang's face lit up, and she quickly followed Yi Tang inside. Watching them, I couldn't help but smile. I knew Yi Tang's personality well, stubborn but kind at heart, with her own sense of justice. Liang, on the other hand, was a model of patience and gentleness, clearly raised with care by Shen Jing. Both were such remarkable girls. How could they ever end up enemies? Over the next few days, Liang patiently taught Yi Tang etiquette, while Yi Tang remained defiant but gradually absorbed the lessons. Though progress was slow, they were making strides. However, Liang's dark circles deepened, and I prepared a calming soup to help her rest. One day, I overheard Shen Jing and the Marquis watching the girls from outside the courtyard. The Marquis wiped his eyes, muttering, "Both are such good children. If only you hadn't fainted back then, none of this would have happened." Shen Jing silenced him with an elbow, though her expression was conflicted. Their quiet exchange left me amused but also reflective. As Yi Tang and Liang continued to grow closer, their interactions became more natural, though occasional small squabbles persisted. I began to feel a glimmer of hope. No matter what the system claimed, I refused to believe that these two wonderful girls were destined to destroy each other. Perhaps with a little effort, their futures could be rewritten. Shen Jing came to ask me about Yi Tang's childhood, what she was like, what she liked, and if she had any particular habits. I paused for a moment before replying seriously, "Let's talk about these things after the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet." Shen Jing was puzzled but agreed. I knew this banquet would be a turning point, and I had to ensure Yi Tang's safety first. The day before the banquet, I was so anxious that I spent the entire day in the kitchen, cooking 20 dishes in a row. The Marquis, Shenjing, and their 2 daughters stood silently at the door, not daring to interrupt until I started chopping ribs. Only then did they hurriedly come to help carry the dishes to the table. During the meal, I tentatively asked about the relationship between the Marquis's family and the 3rd prince. The Marquis explained that the Empress Dowager had suggested the engagement between Liang and the 3rd prince, and since Liang had agreed, the arrangement was finalized. Shenjing comforted Yi Tang, promising to help her find a better match in the future. Still uneasy, I proposed to Shenjing that I accompany both daughters to the palace. She readily agreed, allowing me to join as a maidservant. On the day of the banquet, I followed Shenjing and the 2 girls into the palace. During the banquet, I caught my first glimpse of the novel's male lead, the 3rd prince. When he and Liang briefly exchanged glances, Liang quickly averted her gaze, seemingly avoiding him. Later, I quietly asked her, "Do you dislike him?" She frowned slightly and replied, "The 3rd prince is a good match, but I have no choice in the matter." Her tone was gentle but resigned. Hearing this, Yi Tang scoffed. "Stop pretending to be all noble. If I didn't like someone, I wouldn't marry them, no matter what." Liang was taken aback and fell silent, lost in thought. Watching her, I sighed. This child didn't seem fully content with the engagement either. During the banquet, a maid from Consort Qing's palace summoned me to help. Before leaving, I instructed Yi Tang and Liang to stay together. When I returned, I found only Liang, looking frantic. "Mother, my sister is missing," she cried. I immediately led her to search for Yi Tang, relying on the system's guidance to locate her in the western pavilion of the Imperial Garden. From a distance, I saw the 3rd prince smiling as he spoke to Yi Tang. "You know about the mix-up with the Marquis's children, don't you? It turns out you're their real daughter." Yi Tang sneered. "What's it to you?" The 3rd prince offered her a piece of cake. Yi Tang took a bite, only to toss it aside moments later. "Too sweet. Not nearly as good as what my mother makes." I saw the 3rd prince's expression darken. Suddenly, he pulled out a handkerchief and flung it over Yi Tang's face. She collapsed, and he caught her, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "Such a stubborn country girl. My mother said people like you need to be taught a lesson. Soon, you'll either beg me yourself or let others witness your shame." Alarmed, I burst out from behind the rockery and shouted, "What do you think you're doing?" Liang, lifting her skirt, rushed forward and slapped the 3rd prince hard. "Do you think the Marquis's family has no one to protect them? You're shameless." The 3rd prince, stunned, stammered, "I was just having a conversation with the lady." He quickly threw the cakes on the table into the pond to destroy any evidence, but Liang snatched the plate and hurled it at him. I sneered. "A prince using knockout powder on a girl, how commendable. I wonder how the emperor will deal with this." Shenjing and the emperor arrived shortly after. Shenjing's face turned icy when she saw Yi Tang unconscious. "Who dares harm my daughter?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. The emperor, his expression dark, ordered an investigation. Liang calmly recounted the events, leaving the 3rd prince pale and panicked. Finally, unable to contain himself, he snapped, "She's just a daughter of a commoner. I was doing the Marquis's family a favor by swapping the bride for Yi Tang. If you insist, Liang can marry into the palace as a concubine." Liang's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly regained her composure. "Qin Liang will never be anyone's concubine," she said firmly. The emperor, clearly displeased, decreed that the 3rd prince would be confined to his quarters for 6 months and have his salary docked for 3 months. However, the Marquis dramatically knelt, weeping and wailing, "Your Majesty, I have failed my ancestors. I cannot even protect the last of the Qin family's bloodline. I might as well die." He made a show of rushing toward a pillar to hit his head, but Shenjing smoothly stepped in to block him. I stood frozen in disbelief while Liang whispered, "Father does this every time." It's how he gets the emperor to compromise. Don't worry, it works. Veins bulging on his temple, the emperor sighed heavily and reluctantly added another punishment, 10 lashes for the third prince. Later, I heard he couldn't leave his bed for 2 months. Carrying Yitang back to the Marquis's residence, I noticed Shenjing staying close by, her protective presence reassuring. When we returned home, Yitang slept until the afternoon of the next day. The third prince had drugged her heavily. As soon as she opened her eyes, she stretched happily, only to jump in shock. Clutching her chest, she pointed at the 4 panda-eyed figures by her bedside and exclaimed, "Why are all of you here? You scared me to death." She then leaped out of bed, grinning widely. "Mother, what was for breakfast? I feel like having seafood congee with some pickled radish." "That would be perfect." Shenjing flicked her forehead lightly, giving her an exasperated look. "All you ever think about is food. Do you even know how worried we were?" Yawning, Liang recounted the events of the previous night, lowering her head in guilt. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, my sister wouldn't have gone through this." Yitang frowned. "Why blame yourself? That dog of a third prince." Before she could finish, Liang quickly covered her mouth. Yitang pried her hand away, holding it in hers, and said earnestly, "It was his doing, not yours. Stop taking all the blame. No one's blaming you. Just eat more and stop overthinking, okay?" Liang smiled softly and sighed. "I've taken your place for so many years. How could I not feel guilty?" Yitang rolled her eyes, then hugged my leg. "You didn't take everything. I still have mother, don't I? And she cooks the best food: crystal pork knuckles, braised pork, lion's head meatballs, crispy roast duck. When she fantasizes about delicious food, I felt something wet on my leg." Yitang had wiped away the drool on her mouth and looked up at me with sparkling eyes. "Mother, I'm starving. Let's eat." The room burst into laughter. I took everyone, 2 adults and 2 children, to the kitchen, where they helped me prepare the meal. I brought out fresh beef and lamb, sliced them thinly, peeled prawns to make a smooth paste, and placed everything in bamboo containers. I also made soft duck webbing, fish balls, and some greens. For the base, I sautéed beef fat with cinnamon and star anise to make the broth, then prepared a dipping sauce. The servants set up a charcoal grill outside, and we placed the pot on top. The hot pot, or antique soup, was ready. That night, we sat around the table, eating until we were drenched in sweat. The Marquis wasn't used to spicy food and silently cried while eating, too busy to complain. Shenjing, wearing a simple dress, devoured the food with the same enthusiasm as Yitang. The 2 of them wielded their chopsticks like lightning. Meanwhile, Liang ate gracefully, her gentle smile never fading. "If only things could stay like this forever, a happy, complete family," Shenjing said softly. Though she struggled with words, she kept reaching out to give both children more food. I smiled and replied, "Of course, it will always be like this." But I didn't know our hopes would soon be dashed. Liang packed her belongings, ready to leave the capital. Shenjing was reluctant. "Do you really have to go?" she asked. Liang bowed firmly. "I've studied the classics my whole life, understanding reason and propriety, but I've never traveled far. I once thought this mansion would be my entire world, but now I realize I have my own path. And it must be one I choose for myself." Tearing up, Shenjing nodded. "All right, my Liang has grown up." Liang planned to travel alone to study. Though Shenjing worried, Yitang prepared plenty of snacks for her, reminding her to stay safe and promising to take care of both mothers in her absence. "Just make sure to take care of yourself," Yitang added. Liang squeezed her hand, smiling. "You and mother have traveled far together for years. I'm only going away for 1. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Look after yourselves." Yitang gripped her hand tightly, unwilling to let go. Finally, she sighed and relented. The Marquis, meanwhile, hid behind the mansion's gate, crying uncontrollably and unable to see her off. After Liang left, life returned to normal. 2 months later, in a small town in Jiangnan, Liang was on her way to a tea house with a book in hand. "Miss, would you like to try our new tea? It has milk added to it, and everyone says it's delicious," I said with a cheerful smile. Yi Tang leaned in, teasing, "Yes, yes. It even helps whiten your skin. Miss, you've tanned a bit from traveling, haven't you?" From behind, Shen Jing, chewing on a blade of grass, asked, "Where are you headed? Want to come with us?" Liang dropped her book in surprise, then ran toward Shen Jing and me, throwing herself into our arms. Yi Tang pouted nearby. "Why didn't you bring me? I wanted to come too." She squeezed in beside Liang, hugging tightly. "We're family, aren't we? Don't leave me out." I laughed and replied, "Of course not. We'll always be a family." As for the Marquis, he stayed behind for work. He was probably still in the mansion, quietly wiping away his tears. The end.